Hey, welcome. So today is kind of like the lesson to rule all lessons. It's how to grow your voice and what that particular process is. So I think it's really important to note that there are exercises and things that we can do to grow our voice, but it's ultimately a process, just like getting in shape. Um, any sort of physical skill that you learn and finding the right kind of balance is really, really important. So, we're going to talk about that whole process. How do we know how much to condition our voice and when we're overdoing it or underdoing it and sort of getting out of that cycle? Because with anything with the body, it takes sort of building up a certain kind of momentum to get this to work. Hi, welcome. So yeah, we're talking about how do we actually grow our voice and what does that mean um, in terms of range and power, size of the voice. That's all the kind of stuff that we're going to talk about. There's particular exercises and different categories and different voices. Different people need different things to get their voice into balance. And then when we get our voice in balance, that's when it starts to develop and it's a little more subtle and indirect than people would think. And so, again, like if you way overdo it, you might set yourself back. That's why it's really important to pace yourself and to take note of sort of how your voice is changing from day to day. So, we're going to go over a lot of different strategies about this. And it's kind of like the whole point of all of this 30-day singer stuff is like, what is an actual process to get progress with your voice? Um, and again, like the way that we train the muscles in particular, and that stimulates our body to actually develop vocal skill is not as direct as we might think. So there's lots of things that we need to learn how to coordinate and find appropriate balance to get that to work. So the first thing, and this might be review for a lot of people, but it's a really good checklist. The first thing is we want to make sure that we find deeper breathing. You'd be surprised, like I get a lot of feedback videos where I can just kind of tell that the lower body is not as active, visually, but also by the sound and the sort of type of strain that you might see in a voice. Um, so that's the first thing is like, are you really doing lower belly breathing or are you trying to support your sound from a higher place? And we'll talk about particular exercises for vocal support in a second. But that's the first thing is actually working with your breath and making sure that you have an appropriate connection. And even here, there's balance with this. Like if you take like this sort of heroic breath and really try to like do this kind of stuff, it's actually not going to serve you as much. And we want our breath to ultimately be pretty natural. And we want this whole skill to be really automatic ultimately. So we're training and conditioning our voice to be more responsive and just to function in a healthier way. And I'll talk about sort of what you'll notice as your voice is developing and what might be some signs that you're sort of pushing your voice in the wrong direction or not working it enough to keep it stable. So please ask questions as we go. I know for a lot of people who check into these, you're not necessarily following all the content. So I want to make sure that I provide some space here to answer questions that you might have about your vocal journey. Everyone goes through a process of vocal development. It's always changing throughout our entire life. Again, it's just like being an athlete. We have to check in with our voice, but there's definitely this important phase when you're just starting out where you learn um, to develop your voice and sort of what that process is like. So first thing is, really use your hands, use a mirror, take a look at what's going on and try to gain some awareness with your body. And this is hard to do when we're actually performing. So that's why we have to have a practice outside of just singing in front of people. So when you're breathing, make sure that you're really letting your belly and your abdominal muscles relax so that you drop down and out into your lower abdominal muscles in your belly. So we'll do a couple breaths that help us condition these muscles. There's lots of strategies that just work with breath work in general. The first one is just making sure that you can get that kind of breath. So what you're going to watch for is you don't want your shoulders to come up like this. And people always ask me these questions of like, do I breathe through my nose or my mouth? Ultimately, we don't want to create any strain up here. So we don't want to be trying to pull in air with any of our facial muscles. So I just say, keep your face open, keep it relaxed. Um, Yeah, we're gonna get that. We're gonna talk about all of that vocal balance thing, and that's sort of the whole point of this. So stick around, and hopefully I'll be answering some of those questions for you as we go. Um, so the first thing is just allowing yourself to take in air more posturally by expanding your belly. And by relaxing your lower back. So that's why I always, one of the first things I do with students is just make sure that we take a second to kind of stretch out, get loose, shake things out, and even especially open up your lower back, do some forward folds, do something that helps you get a little more body awareness, like go on a quick jog or go swimming. All of these things are really, really helpful before you start working on your voice because you're just going to have more awareness of what's going on. Awareness is one of the most important and first steps that we have when we're dealing with vocal growth because we need to know exactly what part of our voice we need to pay attention the most to. So, we breathe from our belly, and you want to make sure that this area stays pretty neutral. I'm pulling in air by letting my belly drop and expand. And this is one of those hard things already about the voice is it's somewhat of an autonomic or sort of passive process and then somewhat active, and we want to make sure that we're dropping into the right kind of sensation of deep breathing. So I just give myself a moment to actually sit here and feel what that's like. Let those muscles expand and let the air go. And notice that it takes some time for the air to escape. You might try this in different positions, like laying on the floor, sitting down, standing up, and put your hands in different places and just feel how your body expands. So already right there, people I find are trying to breathe from a more of a clavicular place. Try to say that 10 times fast. But that's sort of like what we do throughout the day. It's this sort of sensation of rising and falling, and we want to avoid that actually with our singing. We get plenty of oxygen this way, but we can't control the air pressure very well and create stability with our air pressure. So that's why we really want to make sure we're dropping into our belly and allowing those muscles to expand. A lot of athletic skills we're trying to suck up and in, and with the voice it's the exact opposite. We're letting ourselves drop down and out with our breath. So there's some things that you can do to actually condition your breath to get deeper and deeper. And this is through air resistance. So one of them is actually you can use like a straw and blow bubbles in water. And that's going to help you strengthen those muscles. And the thing that you want to pay attention to is what happens to your breath after you finish your exhale and allow it to really expand. We call that the breath recovery phase, right? Where it's opening and relaxing, and then do it again in a cycle. So you can't just do this one time. You have to get into a flow as you work it. So if you don't have a straw and a glass of water, you can also just do this by using a hissing style exercise. So we're in a TS sort of shape. Our lips, tongue, and teeth are close together. Now I'm not pushing from here, and I'm not trying to push air out, but instead, what I'm doing is actually creating resistance of air, trying to stay expanded with my belly, and I'm not letting it cave in as I exhale. This is going to help us create resistance against our breath, and that's actually going to get you to breathe deeper and deeper. And if you think about what happens when we're singing a song, we're actually going into a breath cycle like this, and we're building up momentum with our voice. And so, as you're building to a climax, like a typical song might start more relaxed and then go towards a higher, more intense note. We need to sort of get into a positive cycle of breath. If you're doing this the wrong way, you're going to start to feel yourself squeezing and kind of pushing the air out and running out of breath, and it gets into a vicious cycle. So we try to practice this kind of separately from everything else, and you'd be surprised how much just working with your breath is going to improve your overall singing. And we're going to talk about sort of the system that I often do. It's a very well-rounded practice that we layer on until we're singing in a very balanced way. So just like as you're mentioning here, how do I get my voice balanced, or how do I let my voice balance? We're going to talk about the different sort of cues that you need to pay attention to. And as you do those things more consistently day by day, you're going to find and notice that your voice just starts to naturally develop. My teacher back in college would always say, when the note becomes available to you. So again, I talk about this sort of indirect process. So you can't really overforce it because you're going to set yourself back sometimes. So let's do this hissing style exercise and feel free to follow along with me. I'm putting my hands on my belly. I'm noticing them expand as I take in my breath. And then I gently sort of lean down and out as I exhale with that hiss going. Now, notice when your body starts wanting to cave in, that's when you need to let go and allow your breath to start expanding again and get into a cycle, right? We don't need to start with our longest, just most pressurized breath. In fact, it's much better that you sort of coax your body into this subtly over time and be patient about it. So if you find that you're running out of breath really quickly, that's fine. You notice it's caving in like this, just let it go, let it fill up with breath again and try again. And just try to stay even with your breath. This is going to help stimulate the muscles and just work the whole respiratory system. So if we just go into a cycle and we'll do it one more time, but I recommend that you do this for like, a few minutes actually, like maybe 5 minutes and notice how you feel by the end and just how automatic your breath starts to get. We want it to just sort of function for us so we don't have to think about it because singing is a lot of multitasking. So again, I breathe from my belly and I go down and out. And I go into a cycle like this, noticing how my breath responds. I use this sort of analogy of it's like when you put your arms in a door frame and you create resistance, and then you notice your arms just start to kind of float up. It's the same thing when we do this with our breath. We create this resistance, and then once we start running out of breath and we let go, we naturally expand more and more. This is going to develop your breath, right? So that's the first step. The next step is we need to pay attention to our resonance. This might seem like a very complex thing, but it's actually very natural as a process. And just need to explore sort of these sweet spots with resonance. And we'll use some techniques that are going to help us coax that out of our voice. Yes, I do this pretty much every day, especially because I'm working with students, almost every single day. I usually take like a day or two off during the weekend, but sometimes I have, uh, you know, performances and gigs that I do then as well. So especially right before I'm about to sing anything, I always check in with my breath. Especially if it's early in the morning, like our breath tends to get kind of shallow sometimes. We need to sort of wake it up so that we're starting to do this more naturally without forcing it. So that's the first step. The next step is discovering resonance. So when we don't have good resonance in our voice, we tend to overly push and try. We do this thing called forced resonance, where our head and our neck comes out, our tongue sometimes gets really tight, or our jaw gets really tight. And this is not a very sustainable technique. Ultimately, it's going to fatigue your voice rather quickly. Um, Yes, yes. I'm glad you mentioned this. With the breath and with pressure in general, your body posture is really important. Ultimately, it's not that you have to be perfectly like centered and rigid, but you want to make sure that you have flexibility, that your upper and lower spine are in balance with each other. So this is also why when I first start singing, I make sure that I get good rotation with my head and my neck, relax my shoulders, maybe put a hand on my chest and a hand by my belly, and then also twist from my lower spine. Doing some of these kinds of things, circular movements are really helpful. And then just try to find a nice balance. Let my shoulders drop down. When we tend to have bad posture, our breath pressure isn't as efficient on our voice. And then we tend to do more of that forced resonance, which is, we'll talk about this as sort of sometimes over supporting, sometimes under supporting, or supporting in the wrong way by squeezing in. We don't want to do that when we're singing. Um, all of these techniques are going to start to limit your range in your voice. And so as we start to correct those things, our voice naturally starts to grow. Again, when we over engage anything around here in our throat, that fatigues the vocal muscles and then it takes them more time to recover. And so once we get in these bad cycles of like way over singing and then our voice not being able to recover fast enough, or sometimes creating this repetitive stress on it, it sets us back. And then ultimately, the voice is not functioning in a very healthy way, and the range starts to diminish. So, oh yeah, and we're going to talk about tension in a second. And this is all kind of connected. So when we don't have appropriate balance of lower abdominal breath pressure and resonance, these other things like our tongue and our jaw start to get involved and try to force the resonance or squeeze the space smaller to help us control pressure. But this is sort of a bad compensating thing that happens. And then it starts to impede the motion of our vocal folds, and create like excessive friction, and other things that fatigue the muscles. And then they have to go through a recovery process. When the muscles get really fatigued, think of it like they get kind of bruised. And so they start to swell up. And then we actually get less resonance. And then we have to push harder. And eventually it leads to like a whole cascade of like vocal injuries and things like that. But once, it's sort of inflamed, we have to let it decompress and relax and get off of our voice. So think of like this, like again, just like any sort of sport or training your muscles, getting in shape. You want to do just the right amount, so that you can continue to do it from day to day. And if you way overdo it, that's gonna actually set you back, because you have to get off of your voice, let it relax, and then come back into it. And at that point, you might have lost some of that muscle memory, and you're sort of in not the right kind of cycle. So it's the same thing if you like way overdo exercising and then you're super sore. Sometimes you even injure yourself. It's not going to actually help you. And especially, like, I like this analogy, like if you way over exercise just one part of your body, it doesn't really help you with your overall fitness, because that's just going to be out of balance. And then often, like, it just kind of goes right back to being not very strong, or it leads to some other kinds of issues with your overall body performance. The same thing with the voice, actually. So we need to find appropriate balance when things are working correctly together. Many hands make light labor. It actually allows the voice to function in a very sort of smooth and effortless way. And that's sort of the art form, is to make it more and more effortless so that we can sing for longer and we can do lots of things, and obviously, like, a lot of issues happen when we start to sing high notes if we're not doing things appropriately. But high notes themselves don't have to be as fatiguing as they often are for people. And that's kind of the whole point of this whole practice in general. Yeah, I think with singing, there's a couple of things that are really helpful. Swimming, anything where you're working your breath, right? Especially like trying to stay like floating above the water. That kind of stuff is really, really good. In general, like yogas, things that sort of work your body in a really balanced way and start to decompress the spine. But in general, like doing any kind of exercise in the right way is going to be helpful, as your body is just going to be, there's a lot of complexity to when our body is more aware and being used in the right way. That actually, it helps us with our own connection to our body, but also the processes like how quickly the voice can recover and development, things like that. So it's actually really important to have a good physical practice on top of the voice. That's going to really help you, because it improves your respiration, cardiovascular system. So especially like aerobic exercises in particular are probably going to be some of the best stuff. But you have to be careful, like with running, for example. If you're doing a lot of heaving, you might lose the correct kind of breathing, right? It's where we want to breathe from our belly. So you might practice that actually while you're running, things like that. So excellent questions. Think of it as like cross training. We're doing all these things to get our body in better shape, so that that our voice and our body is just in general more resilient. So that's a huge part of it. Let's talk about resonance again. So resonance is something that's often missing from people's voices, and it creates a lot of buoyancy. Think of it like we have breath pressure underneath our vocal folds. I'm going to talk more about vocal support in a second, but even this deep breathing is going to help us with that good vocal support. That's subglottal pressure. And then we also need pressure above our vocal folds that comes from resonance. It's actually like an acoustical phenomenon when the waveforms are bouncing around in the right way and we get the right kind of position for different vowel shapes. we emphasize certain overtones that create this back pressure that helps our vocal folds flap without us, again, having to squeeze or try to hold them together or push anything out. This will make our voice louder without having to strain as well. So we talk about like projection, right? That's a huge aspect of resonance. We can do a lot more with our voice with less effort, and that's ultimately the goal. And that's going to help your voice develop and grow. So the first thing that I would do is like a humming style exercise. When our mouth is closed, we can actually better create that inertance or back pressure and start to feel that. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a hum. I'm adding in that deep breathing feeling, right? So the hum is on top of that. Think of this as like a layered system. So I breathe from my belly. I sink down and out and gently flex out a little bit as I go. Now you might notice it looks kind of like I'm chewing a little bit. I'm moving my tongue up and down. And as we change the space internally and we kind of relax this area, I'm sort of flexing and stretching my pharyngeal muscles. This is sort of where we get a lot of the resonance. And if this area is really tight, we can sometimes block that and not quite get to the right sweet spots. So I'm doing this to get that flexibility and also to start hearing the resonance move around my head and my neck. Hi, welcome. So again, I really recommend that you explore humming. It might seem really simple, but as you do this a couple times, you'll start to notice more of that buzzy, tinny kind of ringing sound, and that's our resonance. So I'm going like deep breathing, right? Dropping to the belly. It's ultimately rather subtle. I'm not like throwing my weight around or anything like that. But hopefully you can hear that it's sort of like a little didgeridoo like sound. Hi, welcome. The next thing is we want to explore our vowel shapes. And this is where we're going to start to talk about jaw and tongue tension. You know, when we talk, it tends to be very visual. So we tend to do a lot of like spreading and a lot of motion with our jaw. We want to minimize that when we're singing. And so ultimately, we're trying to get just the right sort of subtle motion to get into these sweet spots. And again, as our lips change, the sort of front of our mouth is opening and closing. And as our tongue changes, going from up to down, that's actually going to emphasize different overtones. And we all have these sweet spots that create our vowel shapes. And when you really find that sweet spot, you're going to hear this sort of amplification of resonance. And that's really the first goal, is to get that to happen, and to undo some of the things that we, some of those habits we have from talking throughout the day. Again, like a lot of tension that we have that kind of holds our voice back is from what we do when we're not singing. And so we have to start to kind of relax that through healthy singing. And then eventually your voice is going to start to grow. But just know that, just like with our body, when you start stretching, right? Like a lot of the inflexibility that we have is from our day-to-day routines. And so when you start stretching, you're first kind of working against some of that and finding appropriate balance. And that's when the voice is going to start to develop and get healthier. Hi, welcome. It's always great to see people from all around checking into these. So the smiling thing, that's like an interesting cue that people will use. You want to be careful with that. Usually what I say is like an inner smile. We want to create space back here a lot of the time, and that's going to help you with your resonance. But ultimately, like, if you look at the anatomy, there's not a lot of space here, and you don't need to force that space open. It's really just feeling for the sensation of resonance and knowing that there's balance there. And I often go by opening and closing the space so that I can just get flexibility with the muscles. When they're tight, they tend to block the resonance. And then the whole system doesn't really work with appropriate balance. And if you're doing smiling like this, sometimes that's a trick that people use to try to get like some extra brightness in the sound, but that's technically more of like a forced resonance thing. We want natural resonance to happen, and we have to sort of discover this with our voice. It's how it functions naturally, and then we learn to sort of utilize that with precision and the appropriate balance of breath support. So if you're smiling like this, what this does is it tends to collapse actually the pharynx in the back a lot of the time and create a lot of tension in the jaw. Um, yeah, yeah, exactly. When you smile, this creates like a brighter tone, but that can lead to some issues like as we start to go up into our higher register. So I call that spreading. Sometimes we can use that particularly when we're belting, but you just have to be careful that you're not collapsing in the back. And it's more important actually to focus on this sort of back internal space. If you think about it, like especially like we were mentioning that alignment thing and posture, like this is the area where the vocal tract is most lined up. And this just kind of modifies things like the lips are the fine tuners. So if you're way over focusing on this, you might be missing out on what's going on here. And that's why, again, I get people to do this kind of stuff to swivel around their head and their neck. When this area gets out of alignment like this, we're blocking the instrument. So think about like, what does it mean to grow and develop your voice? If this is happening, you are literally taking your instrument and kinking it and making it smaller, which can create some brightness, but ultimately you're going to limit your overall vocal capacity. So you want to be really careful about that. And then also what happens in this when we spread, sometimes we get kind of tight in our jaw, right? So you want to be actually kind of careful with that. And then there's even another sort of concept, which is so sometimes if we over rely on one side of our resonator, so like think of the lips and the tongue being the two sort of main toggles with our resonance, they work together. So like when we angle them appropriately together, it creates this sort of bounce back effect. And so we actually oftentimes when we round or cover the lips, we can get a little more of that bounce effect. So it's kind of about a combination of the two things. Um, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question about losing your breath. We're going to talk about vocal support and breath pressure. I think that's really important when we're talking about this. And then also this concept of resonance, the balance between those two things creates air efficiency. We want to be careful that we're not trying to push air out when we're singing. Sometimes we get sort of twisted around with this concept. As we go higher, people think that they need to release more air. That's actually irritating on the vocal folds. And actually, the higher we go, the less air we're releasing. We're creating more pressure and resistance with our lower abdominal muscles and building up that resonance. And that keeps the vocal folds kind of like vacuum sealed. So that as they're vibrating really fast, they're going like that. And that's actually creating less air that's coming out in sort of little tiny, sort of like, think of it like aerosolized fog or like a tiny stream of air. Yeah. So yeah, usually what that sounds like is you're not getting the appropriate balance between breath pressure and resonance. And we want to find this with every pitch that we sing. And the more times we do this, the more it's supporting and nourishing the vocal folds, and then the more resilient they get. And there's all sorts of cool science, like when you do this appropriately, the vocal folds, they're these ligaments. It goes like the vocal folds go from more like muscle to slightly more gelatinous, and eventually like very liquid-like, mucus-like. We sing on this thing technically called the mucosal wave, which sounds kind of weird. But when we're creating a lot of squeezing and tension, or there's not enough sealing happening, the muscles start to get kind of like they get frayed. We run out of breath too quickly, right? All of these kinds of things. Yeah, we're gonna get to this because you're gonna feel it and start to notice it when your voice is finding balance. But yeah, that's usually an indicator that there's something out of balance. And then yeah, just to finish the concept, these ligaments stretch from the muscle and they stretch through the vocal folds over time when it's developing, and it makes your vocal folds more elastic, so they're more responsive. And all of these kinds of things that happen and more resilient. So it's something through the subtle conditioning over time, being patient with it's really important. Um, yeah, yeah. So that and it, what also what you're talking about here sounds like a little bit of a chord compression thing. So it depends on what register you're singing. That's something I would probably want to address more specifically with a person, like in a lesson, and I can help you find that balance. I think that's what I do as a teacher a lot of the time is sort of guide people towards what part of their voice is out of balance and what kinds of exercises are going to help it come back into balance. So everybody needs different things, and you have to be aware of what part of your system is not functioning correctly. And it's like a juggling act, right? If you're missing one of those balls, the whole mechanism starts to kind of fall apart, and we start straining more or doing more compensating techniques. So a way that we can find resonance is through that humming. You can also use straw phonation that can help people. But ultimately, we want to move through our vowel shapes with the heel of our tongue coming up and down. So using a glide like ya, and then using a glide like wa with our lips. And these two things help us find the resonance. And then think of it like we are always trying to connect in with one of those vowel formants of resonance and then kind of surf on that wave. And so the more times you're hitting that correctly, the more the voice is sort of amping up. And that'll help you build up momentum in the voice. And then ultimately the voice will get healthier through this process and start to develop. So simple things, you can go ya and wa and try to listen for that ring. So going like ya, 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 wa, wa, ya, ya, ya. And as you're doing this, move your head and your neck around. Make sure that you're not starting to kind of lock in place. And that's going to help to amplify the resonance. Again, if we're really tight here, things start squeezing and it starts to block the resonance. So we want to make sure that this internal mechanism stays relatively loose and relaxed. Sometimes I think of like breathing in a neutral vowel with everything open, like that, and then starting. So like ya, ya, wa, wa, ya, 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 wa. And then take a breath. Ya, ya, wa, wa, ya. Do you start to hear that resonance that's kind of following my voice? There's actually really cool apps. There's this like one called Spectrum View that's free that you can use to actually hear and analyze the overtones, so you can see them visually, and it just gets you more aware of it. And what happens is you can actually see like you got your bass pitch, and then you have these higher overtones, and then you have your vowel overtone, and then this higher overtone. When you get more of this, it's stabilizing the bass pitch, and that's actually what nourishes the voice. So that's the thing that's often missing. Now, as you start doing this, don't forget about your breath, right? So a lot of people start doing this thing, and then they're yeah, 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 and the air is escaping, right? We need good pressure underneath the vocal folds, and that's simply by staying expanded. We don't have to wrench or force at that breath pressure, but we need to breathe low so our diaphragm falls flat, and then just gently lean down and out as we're doing this. So going like yeah, this resonance actually starts to clear things out. It starts to relax the muscles. So you can use this even kind of therapeutically just to sort of relax your neck and throat muscles and start to create more and more space. The concept of space is a little bit of like a perceptive term. So I think a lot of people sometimes by sort of overdoing this try to like hold things, and that's just ultimately tension too. We feel more space when we get more resonance amplifying. So it's really actually more perception, but as everything is relaxing more and the voice is starting to build up that good inertance or acoustical back pressure, we start to feel like everything here opens up. Yeah. So that's sort of this concept. And that's why I do exercises with glides in them. And then as you start to sing songs, you'll start to notice where these glides are, where there's a good wah or a ya, sometimes even in between words. Like if there's a number of these situations. And that's a place where you can connect in with your resonance again. As we do this more, our body just naturally starts to find these sweet spots. So again, simple exercise. I might go like, I'm just trying to notice moments where I get that ring. Be like, way, just paying attention to anything else that's trying to help and just minimize it so that all I'm doing is just the bare minimum to create that resonance and to get that stability. It's again like a balancing act where it's sort of like popping up on a surfboard, something like that. So it's like, way, you can be messy about this. Just touch base with your resonance. Really, really helpful. There's all sorts of ways to do this. It could be like something simpler and be like, yar, wah. But the goal is I'm trying to make sure that I actually get that sort of tinny kind of ringing sound. If you don't have that in your voice or you can't create it occasionally, it's a sign that you're not quite doing the right balance of forces. And it just takes sort of some, going in a lower part of your range and exploring that, doing more humming exercises until you start to hear and connect with that more. So I would just slowly expand these exercises. Yeah, okay, we're going to talk about this. There's all sorts of cues that I think can be a little misleading with good intention, but they can be a little problematic. Holding your breath is not quite the right way of thinking about it, because if you're holding your breath, the muscles are getting really static. And then often when we're doing that, we start to kind of create a good amount of tension. So we don't want our breath to ever really stop. Think of it more as resistance of air. So there's a little bit of holding back the full exhale. So think of it like if I take a breath and I go like, the air escapes rather quickly. But if I create a little bit of resistance or drag against that, right, the body kind of caves in. If I push down and out against that with my lower abdominal muscles, it's almost just like you're dropping into the weight of your body. You don't need to overdo this. It's going to create this resistance against those muscles, and it keeps the diaphragm flat for longer. But we need to ride the exhale. So eventually, our breath has to let go, and we go through this phase of breath recovery. So if you're holding your breath, sometimes what happens is you actually have trouble filling up with more air, and you get in this sort of vicious cycle where you actually start sort of like suffocating a little bit and like running out of breath, and then you can't really get a good breath at the ends of your phrases. Um, uh, yeah, so you want to focus more on what you just said, like consistent airflow. Um, uh, I'm sorry, I'm having a I'm not quite sure what you're talking about there, but it sounds like you're talking about solfege syllables like fa and t, and the overtones and the connection of the vowel shapes and things like that. And there's like a lot of interesting stuff with that. Um, yeah, so let me keep going with this concept. We're going to talk about vocal support, and that's really what you're talking about here, which is what we do with our breath system and resistance. Um, yeah, interesting. I don't actually, I'd have to look into that a little more. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about with that. Um, yeah, yeah. So let's talk about this. Think of it like we're riding the wave of our exhale, and we want to make sure. It is a little bit like when you're lifting weights, a tiny bit, but we just want to be careful that it's just like with weightlifting. If you're holding your breath while you're doing it, that's actually not very good for your muscles. You want to create a little bit of that resistance. Um, um, so we're going to talk about this sort of sensation. So as we go up in our pitch, we often need more vocal support. It depends. Registration makes for some complexity here, um, but we are gently leaning out and creating pressure as we're going up in pitch, and then as we go down in pitch, we're actually letting that pressure go. So again, if you're holding your breath, sometimes that might make it hard for you to drop down to lower pitches, and we want a dynamic vocal support where we are kind of like riding that wave. So like even with the breath, like that hissing thing that I was doing, you can actually feel this out. You can start to gently flex down and out. It's, if you're having trouble feeling that sort of sensation, it's like when you cough, like you'll feel this little kick out sensation. Um, we can actually build up pressure by flexing out a little bit and then come off of that pressure, but we never want our breath to stop and we never want our breath to completely let go so that all the air escapes. Those are like two boundary lines. So like if I over pressurize and I'm holding my breath and I go like, that's too much, right? And if I doing that, that's not enough. So play around with this and see if you can go like, and come on and off of that pressure. That's very close to what it's like when we're singing. So when we get that appropriate coordination, that also helps our voice get the right kind of balance. Um, um, I'm not really sure what you mean by asymmetrical music, but I try to do all different kinds of music in general. Yeah, like the more kinds of songs that you explore, the better. Think of them as like different routes that you can experiment with, and then ultimately also, yeah, in your practice, that you want to kind of vary up your exercises so that you can continue to reconnect with them and they don't get too sort of dry or by rote. And so that's why I'm kind of always mixing and matching a little bit. And there are ways that I can check in with how my vocal mechanics are going. Yes, lip trilling is good for breath support. Think of it as like any sort of SOVT exercise. So this is the next. Um, I actually not really sure what you're talking about again with the symmetrical music, like that. You there's like I just never heard that term, but I did go to college for music, so got musical training. I'd be curious, maybe you're just the way you're explaining that's a little different from what um, sort of how I have been learning music in general. But like there's all sorts of ways to sing. Yeah, anyways, well, I'll take a look at what that is and maybe I'll get back to you on that. There, like music is always about sort of like different uh, patterns, and sometimes those things are symmetrical, sometimes they're not. It's usually a mix of those things, and it's more about ratios, right? So like that's yeah, I just think that's kind of the mechanics of how music is. So you can label it different ways, but they're just sort of different schools of thought on the same thing. Um, yeah, so let's talk about SOVTs, so we don't kind of lose that topic. I think what you're talking, Dan, is a little more about music theory, um, but that's totally fine. Um, yeah, I'll take a look at what you mean, but like there's music that's symmetrical, like I'm just playing things that are kind of expanding out from a mirror point. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but again, that's not really relevant to our topic today. So um, with SOVTs, it's a similar concept of what I was talking about with resonance. When our mouth is closed or in different different positions, the tongue can feel off the vocal tract. It's a fancy term for, we call it semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. It's like a mouthful, but it's a fancy term for consonants. Um, uh, yeah, these that you're talking about octaves again. Um, I'll look into it, but again, that's for another topic, Dan. Again, we want to make sure we create some good airspace for people who are working on vocal growth and development, and that's sort of a different thing. So yeah, we'll get to that another time. SOVTs, again, are a fancy term for consonant shapes, pretty much. When our mouth is in more closed positions, it helps us find the appropriate balance of breath pressure, and also helps us with that inertance resonance. A lot of the times what's sort of dangerous, though, is people tend to want to squeeze these consonant shapes. They're just in a position, and the very fact that it's closed helps us connect with our lower consonants, like an M or an N or a Z. These are anytime we do a consonant compared to a vowel, we have more of a closed space, and this helps us feel out and regulate that pressure. So think of it like when our mouth is closed, it's easier to maintain the same pressure state. When the mouth is open, it can start to escape faster. And so we have to do it. Just again, the SOVTs help us sort of find that balance without compensating. Again, when our mouth is open, a lot of times things start to pinch or like other things happen to try and control the pressure. And we want to make sure that we're doing it more with the balance of resonance and um, our lower abdominal pressure. So you can explore this just by taking even like the M that we were doing and moving up and down and going like it helps us create that sort of balance of forces without trying to squeeze or do it with any sort of external muscles. Um, yeah. So, anyways, that's that concept. Let's, the same thing with lip trills, right? When our mouth is doing a lip trill, we're only letting a little bit of air escape. So that's also a way that people connect with that sensation. So going like, but again, the goal is I'm really focusing on this, right? So it's like, and feeling that sort of riding as the pitch goes, and then not letting this area try to do it. So if you're going like, that's more forced resonance, right? And that's yes, exactly. Good, Joe. Yeah, exactly. That's sort of the concept here. So yeah. Um, it's sort of it's again like the whole point of this is like yes, people who study singing often are like have some sort of inclination towards it or have learned it from early on, and there might be some sort of predispositions towards it, like any physical skill, but ultimately like anyone can learn this. Um, yeah, and so the whole point is like you can learn it from different sort of ways by listening to people, by paying attention to your body, and ultimately everyone can find this balance and start to grow and develop their voice. You can have formal training, which might speed up that process. Oftentimes people get sort of stuck with certain things, and a teacher or someone in music school can help you get into balance or sort of break that pattern. So the whole point is like even if you're naturally gifted or not naturally gifted, singing is accessible to everyone, just like athleticism or learning a sport or anything like that. So, um, you're mentioning the M is the M better than the NG? They're all good to practice. Think about it like when we're singing, we're moving through all sorts of consonant and vowel shapes all the time, and you want to be able to find efficiency with all of them. And the more of that you do, the better your voice is going to be in balance. M's tend to help you find more forward, bright resonance. N's are in the middle, and then NGs help you feel the sensation in the back. So often I will have people work on particular ones based on sort of where their voice is out of balance. If they tend to be very bright, then we explore the back resonance, and that helps you develop more options for your voice, and vice versa. So you can do like the M, you could go on an N and go like, or the NG, and I encourage you explore all of them and note which ones get kind of difficult or are harder to do, and that'll tell you a little bit about how your voice is, what your natural inclinations are, and sort of where your voice is maybe not quite working appropriately. So it's all about sort of like maintenance and figuring out sort of what parts of your voice are out of balance or harder to form. What kinds of shapes do you develop more tension? Like E vowels, a lot of people want to go like E and spread because of how we speak, but you want more like E, E, I. And that's going to actually create more balance and be a more efficient system. so that you can easily move between vowel shapes without a lot of jaw tension or straining. Um, so yeah, that's sort of this concept. Using SOVT is really helpful. Straws, lip trills, using a Z, an M, an N, an NG. Those tend to be kind of the easier ones to connect to, but ultimately we can do them with all of our consonant shapes, and you want to explore them all and note sort of the efficiency of them and what they feel like. Um, Oh, the singing straws, like, they're often overpriced is my answer to that. They're kind of marketing off of a concept. You can, get, like, a cocktail straw, or I use this, like, just like a metal straw. Different It's more about the diameter, so smaller diameter, you're gonna build up more pressure, and wider diameter is gonna take more energy. So think of it like you can weight train from a smaller shape to bigger and bigger. Um, until you're kind of eventually like able to maintain pressure states with your mouth wide open. So that's kind of that concept. Um, with vowels, you also want to be able to do all of the vowels when you're singing higher, but certain ones can come out of balance more than other ones. So often with the practice, I'm trying to find or create exercises that sort of are the path to least problems, and then go from there. So, for example, like if you're in head voice, often like the wider vowels are harder to maintain chord compression. So I'd start with like an E vowel, which has good high overtones, and then go to an A and then an ah. So I might be like, "Woo," which is going to be easier than "woo," which is a little easier than "whoa." So for people who have bad chord compression, you might be like, "Wee, wee, wah," right? And as you see, as the mouth opens more, and the tongue is in a more lowered position, it's harder and harder to create that balance of resonance. So what I'm listening for is "wee, wee," instead of like "wah," I want "wee," and I get that balance of resonance, right? And that's going to make the mechanism work more appropriately. Like "wee, wah." Do you hear all that sort of tinny ringing sound, right? That's sort of what we're going for. Again, if you don't have that, pay attention to what your belly is doing. Maybe check your jaw. You can feel for your tongue, if there's a lot of tongue tension, it gets kind of hard down here a lot of the times for people. And make sure your tongue's not pulling back and kind of trying to block the space that way. So just kind of a little bit draped by your front teeth like this. And make sure it's nice and floppy. So like, right, if I'm tight, that's going to create sort of blocks, right? Again, which is going to sort of mess with your ability to create that appropriate balance. Or if you're going like, oh, and the tongue is pulling back, that's also going to block the resonance. So again, working with tension and figuring out what the sort of muscles are trying to compensate, and not, when you're not fully doing just the balance of these forces with your breath pressure and your resonance, uh, those are the things that impede the voice and impede the growth. So the practice is about sort of slowly releasing these different things that are inefficient. Um, so that's that process. Again, SOVTs, I just want to talk about that more. It's an important part of the voice, but you need to make sure that if you're thinking about your lower abdominal pressure, that you're not just overusing that, but you're just doing just the right amount to get that resonance going. And then when you do that, you have appropriate balance and you can sing on it. So they're just kind of moments to check in. And you also want to be eventually able to sing vowels as well with good balance of forces. And that's when you really want to focus on the resonance as well. So, I might do an exercise where I'm coming in and out of consonants and vowels, going like, I come up with different sort of words and phrases like make more magic. And these moments where I'm like, make more. I'm actually paying attention to, is this area being active? Am I like, make more magic, and then allowing it to relax as I go back down. So I might play around with that and just know what my voice is doing. This is closer to like when we're actually singing, right? So like make more magic. And the more you can just ride on this balance of support and resonance, the less these muscles get involved, less fatigued they get. So like make more magic. Yeah, the straw effect is really helpful for your muscle memory, is what you're talking about there. Um, you doing it consistently, you build muscle memory, so these things happen more frequently. Um, and then over time, yeah, these muscles externally release, and you start to develop more strength with your voice. Um, that's this whole process again. So we're like, I'm flicking between different kinds of exercises that work my breath, work my vocal support, so my ability to come on and off of pressure with that lower breath. Um, Also focusing on resonance, and then kind of mixing and matching until they're all kind of working together at the same time. And then also things where I'm particularly checking for kinds of tension things. So like someone earlier mentioned, like um, the tongue tension thing. One of them is when we go to rounder vowels. Oftentimes our tongue wants to kind of curl, and instead we want to just use our lips. So I'll do exercises like this, where I'm going like, and I'm just trying to work on muscle isolation, getting my lips to move, and keeping my tongue kind of floppy. So like, like that. So let me talk a little bit again about the process. Again, I was like throwing out a lot of different options. Ultimately, if you're feeling like really lost with all of this, check in with a teacher. We can kind of guide you through what you maybe need to focus on in particular, and give you more exercises. So the process here is we want to check in with our voice a little bit every day or every other day, and just do some of these things, and condition it over time. You don't need to overwork it because that's going to fatigue it. But if you're not checking in with it too, we lose that muscle memory effect. So we want to build up sort of momentum this way, and it helps the body learn. Um, One thing that I find typically happens for people is as your voice is growing, it starts to relax first, where we talk about these external muscles starting to get out of the way. Um, as those muscles start to relax, our voice actually drops a little lower, and then we start to ride up in our pitch and get a higher range. So that's something you want to pay attention to, is like, are you releasing the tension, creating efficiency so you're not straining so much, letting your voice relax a little lower, and then it'll start to expand up higher. That's a typical kind of process for a lot of people. And then the other thing you can do to kind of monitor your progress on vocal growth is something I call weight training with a song. So, like, take a song and find a comfortable range where you can do all of these balance of forces, where you can get breath pressure engaging, where you can get resonance happening without any of these sort of negative compensating habits, right? Like our neck coming out, lots of tension. So, even as you're singing, right, move your head around and check in. Like, is it rigid, or are you able to keep it flexible? Same thing with your lower abdominal muscles. Is your belly relaxing down? Are you starting to hold your breath or get kind of stuck with your shoulders? If that's happening, take your song and drop it down to some lower keys, until you can find good balance, and then start to bump it up bit by bit, right? So a lot of times what happens is people try like a really hard song or something that's really high, and they just try to sing it over and over again, and you're just training sort of negative habits. It's going to make your voice get smaller and smaller. You're going to get more cracking, right? Um, Cracking is often when we have the wrong kind of shape for where our voice is sitting, or we're using the wrong kind of registration. And then all of a sudden, our body kind of bails to a higher or lower place. And that's an indicator that we're not quite finding the right kind of balance. Maybe we're over singing, maybe we're under singing. So it's just a cue again, if you're cracking all the time and you're not trying to do it on purpose. But again, let me show you what I mean by this sort of like weight trading thing. Like, I can take a song, like a little public domain song, like Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. I could do that, right? Like, that saved a wretch like me. If you're finding yourself going like me, getting really tight, it's a sign you need to drop it down. So then I'd maybe try it like Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Somewhere where I can find it nice and relaxed. If you feel like you're doing well, then you can bump it up higher and higher, right? I could be like, Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. So where can I do all of this without any of these other things trying to help? Pay attention to where that is from day to day, and then kind of keep bumping it up, every week or so. Um, yeah, and then the other thing is, growing your voice sometimes is growing your confidence as well. So that comes with also just experience, like practice recording yourself. Sometimes just like knowing that you're being recorded kind of puts you in a different state, and you're in a slightly sort of safer environment. And then note like how your body is feeling, right? Are you getting really tight? Are you starting to breathe in a shallow way? And reconnect with these things that you've done in your practice. I think doing this practice more frequently, uh, makes you more confident because you're just more aware of what you're doing, and like, well, I've done it this way many many times, so I can start to trust my body and trust my voice. But yeah, practice recording yourself. Maybe do some low stake environments where you like do an open mic night, some karaoke singing, sing with some friends or family, before you start like the big reveal for like a concert or something like that. I think a lot of times people jump to like singing in front of a larger audience, and it's way too much. Again, it's like that weight training thing, right? You're like jumping to 100-pound weights in terms of like your confidence. And when we're nervous, our whole sort of sensation of our body changes a lot of the time, and our memory gets kind of weird. And so you have to really trust your muscle memory. And that's the big thing. That's why we do this practice. It gives you more assurance that your voice is going to work the way that it's needs to. It's like being on a tightrope. You're doing tricks in front of people. Sometimes it doesn't work out appropriately. And just I think the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. So that's what I would say in general. It's a practice like anything else. So again, the main principle here is how do we grow our voice before I close off for today? It's about finding appropriate balance in any spot that we're singing, starting in a nice relaxed low range and seeing if you can find those balance of forces, and then incrementally bumping that up higher and higher, maintaining that good technique. And that will slowly condition and stretch the voice over time. If you overdo it and you overstrain and you try lots of repetition, that's actually going to set you back because your voice is going to feel tired and you're going to save the muscle memory of strain. And then that's actually going to take more time to unwork. So be slow and be patient about it. Um, yeah, good. Yeah, isn't it funny? Yeah, again, like, there's like make more magic. I'm using the M concept, right? And so you'll start to notice like all the exercises that we do, and our content is about the right combination of vowels and consonants to help us feel certain things and kind of paving a path towards finding that sort of freedom and release in the voice. I didn't mention today, like vibrato is a product of healthy singing, and that's something that also comes as you do all of this stuff and helps to open up the voice even more. Um, but yeah, make more magic. It's like there's this old throwback that I used to when I was thinking about that one. I don't know if you've come across this one, but it's kind of a similar thing where you go like, Mama made me mash my M&Ms. The whole point there again is why are we saying Mama made me mash my M&Ms? It seems like kind of ridiculous. It's I think because we're getting that SOVT connection. So Mama made me mash my M&Ms. It's sort of weird, but same thing, make more magic magic helps me connect in with that lower breath support. But when I open up to my vowel, and I'll finish with this, is like make sure that you connect in with that resonance. And that, what happens a lot of times is once we open to the vowel, people deflate. And you want to make sure that you kind of ride out into that open space with your support a bit more to help resist the airflow. So when our mouth opens and closes, that's a big change in pressure. And so we want to make sure that we are maintaining some of that support and connecting with that resonance. So like make more right. I'm trying to connect and make sure that resonance happens. Magic. And then also a lot of exercises I think need to build up pressure and then come back down, because that's sort of like that what someone was mentioning about holding your breath. You don't want to only just add support pressure, because then we run the risk of pressing. We need to allow our breath pressure to relax as well. Think of it like weightlifting, right? Like you need to engage the muscles and then relax the muscles and go back and forth. Otherwise, you run the risk of sort of locking things, and that's also not going to help your voice grow. Um, uh, so yeah, this is really, really great. Expanding the belly and the intercostal muscles, they're all really helpful. Think of it as like a balance, right? So there's different muscles that help us engage. I encourage you to feel out both things. With the studies that we've found with breath pressure itself, the lower abdominal muscles tend to be the major actor with those muscles. If you think about like when you cough, anything like that, those muscles expand out as we sort of spike pressure, going to the bathroom, these kinds of things, lifting weights. Notice that it's actually these muscles, but then your intercostals are supportive to that as well. So you want to think of both things sort of expanding out. So if you find it challenging to expand the belly, then it means that you probably should take a little more time and work on that to see if you can get that to work as well. So again, it comes with that many hands make light labor kind of concept, where if we can get contribution from all of these sort of lower abdominal, intercostal, core muscles, that's going to make it so that we don't have to overly wrench or thrust anything, but instead just kind of get this feeling of like being buoyant and expanded. And it'll make sure that no muscle is like overworking. Again, it's a balance thing. And when you get it right, it's disconcertingly effortless is the feeling. So if you feel like you're really like heaving or pushing or pressing or anything like that, you're not quite doing the appropriate amount of balance. You might want to focus on getting more resonance. That'll in turn help your support, and more support will in turn help your resonance. And it just works like that. It's a balancing act. So, I'd recommend that you maybe put your hand with your belly a little more. And actually, specifically, just before we go, I love that there's so many good questions. Maybe work on some staccato style exercises that'll help you feel more connection down there. So going like something like this, like ha 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 ha. And notice how the higher one needs to kind of drop and lean a little more, and it sometimes takes some time to build up that pressure, but you can feel out the difference. Ha 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 ha. You can go like ha 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 ha. It just helps to sort of activate those muscles. You can also do that breath pulsing exercise, going like and try to feel some more connection to that. And again, it's sort of a team effort, right? So the intercostals tend to help with breath control, but they have a little bit more trouble actually building up pressure. So that also might make sense, if I'm following up with all the questions you were asking about losing air rather quickly. It sounds like you're not quite doing enough lower abdominal support that's going to help resist the airflow and create more stability underneath the vocal folds. That will create more efficiency. I would recommend actually explore the belly work a little bit more, the lower abdominal muscles that sort of curve like down and in. So it's not just like in the front, but actually kind of like a little internal. and then go from there. So staccato exercises, breath pulsing, putting your hand down there and trying to feel for that. It's all going to be very helpful, and the SOVT exercises in particular as well. So yeah, hopefully that gets you going on the right path. Again, growing your voice is a process, and you have to stimulate your body to start developing and conditioning those muscles, but little bits at a time, right? So allow it to condition, and then rest and relax, and then condition again. I find a lot of people find a lot of vocal growth when they work their voice and then they actually take a break and then they reconnect to it after a break, so that it's all decompressed and reset. And then they go through the same kind of cycle of like checking in with your breath and checking in with your support and your resonance, and noticing any sort of tension that's trying to follow along with it. So hopefully that's helpful. And look forward to more topics in the future. For Dan, I will take a look at what you mean by symmetrical singing, because I'm not quite I'm not quite sure what you're talking about there. But if you come back, maybe I'll address it again. So as I'm always curious about other things that people are working on. So have a good rest of your day, everybody, and I will catch you all next time. All right, take care.